see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here today with Sharon Quinn. And Sharon, you and I know each other from the Ashoka Activating Empathy competition. You applied, and we want to talk about how can we build a culture of empathy. Perhaps you could just kind of introduce yourself a little bit more, talk about yourself. And I have your website up here as well. I can kind of show on the screen.
Okay, well, Antakarana co-creation learning projects evolved out of 30 years of experience. Once we realized we were doing a research project about 30 years ago called As Buds Blossom. And the idea was to inject into the school curriculum or teaching curriculum the affective domain. That's what we were calling it then. Well, what that actually has come to be evolved as we go on has become known now as emotional intelligence, character development, and the whole aspect of us that really expresses our true human spirit, or the potential that we're always looking to. How do we teach to make humans be more than animals? Be those amazing beings that have drive and care about each other and do inspiring, amazing things. That's really, we tend to call it our human spirit or potential. Well, by what my idea was why don't we use a Montessori environment, because it's a very beautiful way to deal with all the cognitive development, and it gives us a lot of freedom to maybe put and bring into the center of the school the heart, the potential, the affective domain. And for our conversation here, we could say that the affective domain includes the development of the essential skills of human relating. And one of the big words that is being used for this is empathy. And we like to use the word rapport because in our process, we realized empathy was one of the many skills rapport included. So we wanted to have empathy in the bigger umbrella of rapport.
So rapport is really the value that you're kind of like organized around. It's like how to create rapport between people, and you're seeing that empathy is one component of creating rapport.
It's one of the primary components. Like we could split it up in a pie and say maybe there's 10 very vital pieces to rapport, and empathy would be one of those markers.
Well, how are you defining empathy? What does empathy mean to you?
Well, empathy to me means the ability to be able to pick up another person's feelings. Okay, I can see the look on your face. I pick up certain cues, and I'll start to say, something's not right with you today, or you're very happy today, or I feel like you need something, and then I want to help make it easy for you to open up. That would be empathy. I'm kind of reaching and sensing and picking up something about you at an emotional psyche level. And I am wanting to make a connection and deepen that. But with empathy, I may or may not act upon that. I may recognize it, I may see it, but I may not make the choice to actually reach out. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit more.
Okay. So,
now we're starting to go into more like rapport, which will take that bravery next step.
So you're seeing that empathy is kind of this sense of connection, but it's kind of like there's no action component maybe to it.
It may or may not have it, because you're going to have to plug in your will. If you do not will to choose to act upon what you picked up empathically, then it doesn't go any further, does it?
Well, what I'm really looking at is how do we create a culture of empathy? So how do we raise the level of empathy within society and within the schools and the education system? And the Ashoka contest is also kind of focused on that aspect. So do you have some kind of bullet points, ideas, for things that can be done to raise the empathy level within society and schools?
Yes. What I'd like to do first is, one of the things that we're doing with Antakarana is we want to actually take a systems approach. Because to actually create a culture, it has to be everywhere. It has to be organized and intentional as a teaching that we make sure becomes part and parcel of what makes us human. So how do we get there? A systems approach is pretty much going to ensure we get there. Right now, we're just kind of, here, there, a pocket here, a pocket here, a pocket there. It's not unified, and therefore, we're not going to create a full culture that way. You might get one community in Podunk someplace, because they all get on board. But otherwise, we're going to have a pocket here and there, and then those pockets of people are still going to be up against the full culture that's competitive, aggressive, and still coming from strong survival modes. So when we really thought about this, we started with program ideas. But then we eventually realized we had to actually shift the paradigm and go up a notch. Because we started to, let's just even have our conversation be done from that same systems approach. So I'm going to approach.
So let me just say, you're looking at systems. You mean that whole kind of this whole social structure? It's like I mean, in its totality, maybe is that like all the institutions, all the, if you have classrooms and the way everything's organized, the whole system. Then, so you're wanting to look at that. Then,
a systems approach means what you just said. As well as you look first, from a systems approach, you look at the ideal. You're stating the ideal. I want to see a culture, a world of empathy. How do we get there? That's already the systems approach, results orientation. You got to know the big picture, the ideal you're shooting for.
Yeah, it's kind of like, that's how I look at it too, is we need a vision of what we're kind of going to go towards. And I just call, have the tag phrase, culture of empathy for that vision. And it kind of means, how do we maximize empathy within that whole system?
And your phrase is a good phrase for a long-term picture, because what it's doing is it's saying, I want to see it be all culture. I don't want to just see it here and there and everywhere, bits and pieces. You're actually making the statement that it should be integrated and integral to everything. It's the way humans are. The culture gives us that implication.
Yeah.
Implications say a lot, and we really need to think more about the implications. When you say then a culture of empathy, you're actually signaling a lot of people on a word they relate to better than possibly the word initially right now, rapport. Mainly just because of sound bites and other words that have gone out. Yet we can draw people into an even bigger picture of empathy is a vital part of, and step them into the idea of rapport, which is an even bigger idea. Now, if we say we want a culture that is rapport driven, that lives in rapport, we're now also saying not only do they feel each other, we're talking about a society that is actually having harmonically resonant exchanges. They know how to do that, and they live by win-win. They think in those terms.
A lot of this is kind of like vocabulary, and it seems to me, and when I ask people about their values, everybody has their own value that they see as the center. My partner, for her, it's integrity, and everything revolves around integrity. For me, it's empathy. There's other people, it's compassion. Other people, it's justice. So this one value becomes the central organizing kind of process for their lives. And I always look at, how do you tie all these different values together? Because I say, no, empathy is the most important thing. And then it's like, no, rapport is the most important thing. So, or integrity, actually, my partner says integrity is the most important thing, or love. And so you get a little bit of, the relationship. I mean, there's a relationship between all these values. There's a relationship between empathy and rapport. And for me, what I'm hearing when you say rapport, I'm actually hearing empathic action.
Yes.
It's like action. And I really see that as well, that it's like you can have empathy, see how someone else is doing, but it's that actual working together in a smooth, harmonic way. And I think that's maybe what and it takes a sense of responsibility. You're responsible, you know how your actions affect others. And so it's actually doing something together in a very harmonic way with rapport, and
Right.
but it's an action-oriented kind of
Yes.
approach. So I think that we're kind of like talking about the same thing, but maybe just using different vocabulary.
We're definitely on the same page. There's no doubt about that. And when we're talking to people, because we're currently coming from a paradigm, we have to look at, let's look at the whole thing and always talk in terms of from a systems thinking viewpoint, because your questions go directly to it too. A systems thinking viewpoint says, we got our long-term vision, and we need to actually define a lot of what we're talking about so that we stop the islands of thought from being islands. We close those gaps and actually say, look how we're on the same page. We're all eating the same pie, so let's stop getting concerned about my eighth of the pie, your eighth of the pie. And let's all kind of see, when we talk about it, we start to include all these different ideas simultaneously. So we might, let's say, just for the sake of this conversation, I'm just going to say, let's say we're using the word rapport because it includes action, okay? That action, if it's not coming from integrity, is going to be problematic too. If I feign or I want to take my empathic skills to manipulate you, I can. Can't I? I can abuse that skill of sensing you and picking you up and then go after all your weaknesses that I see. Now that rapport would be being abused without the integrity factor. So sometimes in terms of thinking about this like an umbrella and hanging different things off the edge of the umbrella that are the major pieces, helps everybody realize they're on the same page and helps everybody get off the labeling thing that's keeping us as islands of separation, because we have to unify.
Yeah. Are you saying to see the relationships between all these different values, or how?
Yes. And you educate that all the time. When you may have like your big statement, we want a culture of empathy, but then you start throwing in how in one dialogue or in one thing, you start throwing in the 4 or 5 major components. And you weave it through the whole conversation so that it starts to actually, they hear it again, unified. They hear it again and again and again. And it starts to bring this separation and my island, my space, my idea, my belief, my passion. We start doing the actual integrative process of coming into rapport with each other, where we start saying, let's all get on the same wave. My part of the wave and your part of the wave are all the same wave, and we have to hit all these points, but let's keep them on a wave. Let's not have them be islands in a circle. Instead, let's have them be like a sine wave that's moving in and out of each other's skills, because the skills are truly fully integrated. If they're not integrated, we won't really have a society that is empathic or living in rapport with integrity. See how I just pulled all the ideas together to make one statement, but didn't really say one was highlighted over the other?
Yeah, it's kind of just connecting all the different values together, because they all kind of interrelate with each other, and it's how I'm seeing it is people are just kind of seeing different different parts of the picture and kind of focusing on different parts, and it sounds like you're saying we got to have a kind of a dialogue to dialogue.
This headset keeps wanting to fall off. That's okay. Yes, I exactly agree. And that is the key cogent point that at Antakarana that we kind of think is the unique gift we bring to the whole picture, is we're really focused on trying to get everybody to take all these disparate ideas and realize they're a oneness. We want to come into a unity of oneness, and systems thinking puts us there. It is an actual foundational structure that everybody can get on the same page with to realize there's a value in coming together, because we're creating something really, really big. And this really big thing, if it's not a unity of oneness, we'll never really be in rapport. We'll never really enjoy the gifts of what empathy brings to the picture. Will not really allow us to use empathy in a way that's filled with integrity so that it does good.
Well, one of the definitions I've heard of empathy is when the blocks to action are removed that don't exclude. It's just that it's like empathy is there when when we're working together and there's a smoothness, and I mean you've probably seen it, and or at least I've seen it in groups right? There's a group, they want to do some kind of action, they kind of talk about what needs to be done, but somebody doesn't feel heard in that group, and they just kind of, they just kind of suppress it. And then when it comes to action, that suppressed feeling of I wasn't heard, it gets heard in subtle, ways to kind of sabotage the whole movement of the group kind of going forward. And so, and so at that point, you don't have rapport, right? It's like people aren't totally they're really not hearing each other totally. And
exactly.
And until that total hearing of what everybody is feeling, and so they all feel included, that, I mean, just nothing, it kind of just sabotages the effective action and effective.
That's very insightful.
Yeah.
And from a systems standpoint, you nail one of the reasons why we went to a systems thinking viewpoint, was because we realized that if we don't have everybody communicating in a way where we're on the same page with a certain rapport, it's going to leak out, as you pointed out, and it is sabotaging, because that person will feel certain level of either rejection, resentment, because their value and worth has not been put on the same table. They will feel that what they're bringing isn't being valued, and resentment starts to go in. Resentment is when you feel someone is taking your value and worth. That will end and eventually become like the rotten apple in the barrel that eventually poisons other weaker. It'll go through the weaker sections where they're maybe not fully feeling like there's an integrity situation, so I feel safe to put my things on the table. Because there have been people, let's be honest, we have to look at the condition we currently are in as a society.
Well, you were talking about systems thinking, so that was kind of one of the questions was, well, what is the existing system? So it sounds like you're about to address that.
Right. There's several things to look at in answering that question. The first one that I'll take at the moment is, we have a current system. Let's look at first humanity. What is humanity evolves, right? And we've evolved through different educational paradigms to be where we are today. So let's take a quick systems look at that whole thing. What's the very first place humanity really starts working and coming together for survival? And it's very primitive. We're going to form tribes. We're going to come together because those dinosaurs are big, and we have to be a group to save ourselves. And then we continued, though, and it was mainly our paradigm for a long time has really been quite primitive. It's about surviving. We just want to be able to put food out, live, pay the bills, eat, sleep, have shelter, right? Then we start evolving to get a little bit more, and we start coming into more of what they want to call the Enlightenment age, where we start thinking in terms of everybody needs an education, not just a few. Okay, let's try to get people to all have more education. And eventually then we go into the Industrial age, in which we still brought in, and we called it the Age of Enlightenment. And we start studying the classics and some of our more honored people in other cultures that we saw had wisdom. But what happens is we're now coming out of the Industrial age, and we're moving into the age of technology. And in this technology age, we're kind of approaching the world that we saw envisioned in Star Trek, where you see people, you see one thing that's implied through that whole show is humanity came together, didn't they? So that they could explore beyond Earth. They started becoming a unified field of intention to go out and meet other worlds. But they had to come to some kind of togetherness. So the one thing that we keep repeating that our systems have not really addressed very well is shifting from that primitive desire to be competitive and get my needs, not our needs, but my needs. And that causes us to be competitive. And in competition, you're not really coming from an empathic model. You're not coming from a rapport model. You're coming from a better than model, and a model that says win-lose. I got to get what I need first. Not can we both get our needs met on a pretty level playing field, right? So now here is education. We were coming out of this Industrial age, and we're realizing that we have a society that's pretty warlike. We're very competitive. We're very aggressive. But we have this other swell coming up of people who are saying, we can't continue this world. We're going to have to come together on the same page. We got to start thinking in terms of how do we all win? How do we all benefit?
So you're saying that the society, the system is kind of based on competition. We need to move the system from being competition driven to actually maybe empathically driven.
Yeah, or rapport driven.
Rapport-driven.
Something that's more inclusive. Something that's integrity, that has all those skills that everybody who's passionate about empathy that comes to the empathy table, they all bring pieces that they realize are part of it. They're just focusing, they just got the light cast a little stronger on their piece.
Yeah, so it's making sure that everyone is heard in that.
Exactly.
That, instead of competing where one person kind of wins, that everybody's voice is heard. And that there's kind of like an integration of all those different voices then.
Exactly. Because then we get then we have we're talking about the same kind of thing we talked about the other day a little bit. Acceptance is the higher road of tolerance. Tolerating implies I'll put up with you. But acceptance says I open and I take you as you are.
So in terms of getting people to start integrating with each other, one of the kind of the terms that's been used is tolerance. So we all have to be tolerant of each other, and you're kind of like saying that that doesn't cut it. That's not good enough in terms of bringing people together. Tolerance is not going to do it. It's we need to take it a step farther, basically.
We must take it a step farther. We will fail if we don't. Because if you just think about it, and I have been throwing this out for several years to people, and I'll say to them, I tolerate you. I accept you. Do you matter which one? They go, nobody has said and chosen, I tolerate you. Nobody. They all go, I want you to accept me. I like that better. I feel better. I feel welcomed. I feel like you've opened to me and you're not trying to change me. You're not trying to undo me. You're not trying to outbetter me. You're actually giving me the feeling that maybe we can have an honest exchange and maybe we can start building trust. Because I will matter in this equation. You're not just going to put up with me, and maybe try to manipulate me somewhere down the line or, kind of dislike me behind my back. Like me to my face and dislike me behind me. Acceptance makes it pretty clear to somebody, I'm not going to talk about you behind your back.
Well, how do we get there then? You're kind of explaining the situation where we're at. It's like, how do we get from this model of competition to a model of empathy? And you're calling it rapport. I'm calling it empathic action, I think.
Okay, so here's what you just said, your question. Okay, this is how system thinking works. We're talking about the ideal, then we talked about where we are. That's a systems thinking approach. You get both on the table. Where do we want to go? What does it look like? And that's what we want to do right now, is get everybody to really get some clarity about the ideal we're shooting for. And we got to get clarity about that, and we got to bring everybody into a unity and realize that all these pieces are important. Don't go just after compassion. Don't just go after integrity. Don't just go after rapport. Okay, you go after the holism, all the pieces. Now, in looking at this, we right now our current, everybody said, hey Sharon, you got to get this into a motto. You got to get this into a phrase to talk about. I've readjusted the phrase, we've readjusted the phrase, we've readjusted the phrase, and each time we take it up a little higher, the bar goes a little higher to be more inclusive. Okay, so when I said effective domain, okay, a lot of people didn't even know what that meant, only educators. The effective domain pretty much covers all of it, but it's very pedagogical and not very warm and fuzzy word. So while it's there, let it just stay there, okay? So what else? Then Goleman comes up and starts really looking into the molecules of emotion with Candace Burt and all them, and we're talking about emotional intelligence. Well, that's exactly right. We have a bicameral brain, so we have two aspects of ourselves that must be addressed at all times. So we're looking at cognitive and emotional intelligence, which is our entire psyche. So we have to have those two pieces coming together in everything that we're doing. All right, so the affective domain, the cognitive domain are a holism. We're not trying to get one piece separate from the other. All right, so what happened in working with our experiment in As Buds Blossom when we were working with the kids? What did I realize after 5 years of doing this process and letting the kids teach us how to change the paradigm, what the paradigm needed to be changed to from the basic ideas we had? I realized that the thing that made everything magical, by magical I mean things people thought could not happen, started to happen with us as a group community. The kids were as much the teachers as the teachers were. So the learning was a two-way situation. Was I had to learn how to come into rapport with the children. I had to have not only empathic skills, I had to have integrity. I had to have compassion. I also had to be a strong leader. I couldn't just be a drippy lovebird, because there were times I had to sit down and say, we're not going there. I had to be a leader and brave enough within myself to say, we're not going to do that. We had to have respect. Respect was the core key element that we all gave each other in pure acceptance. Because I wanted it and I needed it to feel safe, to open myself to you, then I have to give it to you. That became non-negotiable. We all will respect each other here. We will not tolerate for even a tenth of a second one rude behavior, one disrespectful act. So what we started doing in the school was, if somebody turned around, a newer kid came in, let's say, and turned around to somebody and said, hey, you're a jerk, everything in the school stopped. Everybody put their lessons down and walked over and said, we don't do that here. What makes you think you're so special as to label another human being a jerk? Maybe he made a bad choice right now, and let's talk about that. But his personhood is intact. He's as respectful and as great and as worthy to be here as you. We don't do that here. And we're going to sit down and talk about it till you realize you're not allowed to do that here. And if you want to stay here, you get with us. Well, everybody wanted that respect, so they gave it up fast. They had to just realize there was a strong boundary that was being set in this school, and it was going to be upheld by the leadership and all the participants. Then, within days, it was solid. And it became, to everybody else, people would come here, and you'd even hear the kids say to a new child, you know, there's certain things we don't do here. And you'd see them start laying down the rapport rules or the empathy rules or the integrity rules. What they were doing was setting boundaries and making it clear, we're a community and we're going to welcome you in, but you're not going to hurt anybody. And nobody here is better than anybody else. And that's why we're creative. That's why we're so happy. You come here and you want to be part of this happy place. We're happy because nobody's allowed to harm, or hurt another person without consequences immediately coming their way.
Do you talk about, within that environment, do you talk about empathy? Do you kind of say this is also about empathy, and this is how we create empathy, and this is what empathy is? And is it part of the dialogue, or is it more around like topics like respect and rapport? I
love your question. You got great questions. I really enjoyed chatting with you because you really got deep thought ways of approaching all this. I can tell this is important to you, and you think a lot about it and you work with it a lot. And while empathy becomes part of the dialogue, it's second or third. What we discovered made the difference, that made it happen almost like snapping your fingers, was we went in. I'm just going to give you the concept, and then you can figure out how we can talk about it, okay? Because I'm very experiential with all this. Here's what it came down to. I would tell everybody, you know what? You're beautiful. You're wonderful. I can't look into the eyes of anybody here and not see a great person. Now, but I also see a lot of different people. But you know what? I'm also going to be real honest with you. I know that you are struggling. because you hear two different voices inside your head and you just don't know what to make of that, and you don't know what to do with it, and you don't know how to handle it. And they'd kind of look at me like, where are you going with that? So the first one I'd say, well, the first voice that I know everybody hears is, I don't want to give that to you. That's mine. I'm better than you. Oh, I got more money, so, I said, who is that? And they all went, oh. And then they would just start telling me all these different ways we attack each other. Okay? Selfish. They just start putting it in their words, their terms, and, easily. It's just spontaneously without my doing anything else. I'm even talking about 2- and 3-year-olds. If they've got articulation skills, this dialogue takes off like you lit dry timber. They know who that voice is. And they're feeling really relieved that you know that voice exists, because you're now helping them talk about it and validate it's real. But I didn't say it was who they are, did I? I called it a voice in their head, a part of them that they have to listen to and think about that's calling them into a behavior. So then I say, now we're going to call that one the petty me. And he does little things. And they all go, yeah, the petty me. We know who the petty me is. Okay? And he makes me little. Makes me be little, do little things. Belittle myself. So then we'll throw a bunch of words in. Belittle, attacking, guilty, shame, abusive. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. You're creating just the dialogue and creating the vocabulary for emotions and feelings.
Exactly.
So,
on the negative side with the petty. Okay? And we're relating it not to personhood, but to behavior choice. And a voice, a call, the will. We're actually going to the very thing we talked about when empathy, if you don't will to act upon it, it goes nowhere. So what we're actually doing is going to the core of every human being that must be addressed if we want this to be a cultural thing. We have to get clarity that we have a free will. And it's always choosing between two behavior patterns, the bicameral brain calling in two different directions, the inner psyche calling us to be our greater good or our greater little. Petty me. So then we talk about that and everybody's really like, whew, I'm glad we know about that one. I'm glad we've all talked about that, because at home people say, don't act like that. Don't talk about that part. You're not allowed to be that person. I'm just giving a free dialogue to it. And I'm not judging it, am I? I'm just giving a dialogue and saying, we recognize it and we're going to call it the petty me.
So
and they just go, okay,
the question,
cool.
the question though was, are you using the vocabulary of empathy? Because, empathy kind of goes through our society. I mean, it's like what I'm seeing is we don't use the vocabulary kind of explicitly talking about empathy. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of looking at, if we build a culture of empathy, it seems one of the things we need to do is have the vocabulary and say, well, empathy is important. So we actually talk about empathy, how empathy works, and kind of the processes like you're talking about, creating a vocabulary, being able to articulate your feelings is a way that kind of helps create empathy, right?
Okay, so here's the next part, right? This goes more to now to your next part of your question that was originally there. I just had to put a few pieces together. Now, then I look at them and I say, now, but there's another voice inside of you, isn't there? And that one is sweet, kind, reaches out to other people. Wants to sit down and hold your friend's hand because you care, they're not feeling good. And you want to go up and share the new thing you just made. And then the next thing you know, we go into another explosive dialogue that is about the bright, happy me who does great things, who's the great part of me. There's where the empathy part is going to be. Okay, then we have that same explosive running around dialogue in their terms that I then keep taking like bridges, their words, and taking them into more adult words. And we just play this. So it has to be done on a rapport thing, because I'm not going to teach it as a cognition. I'm going to teach it as an experiential, living relationship skill that is never going to change and leave this school. The way I do it with a 3-year-old is going to evolve, but be the exact same process for a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old. But it will get more mature, won't it? I'm not going to use the same childish terms, but we'll know that it's the same track that will have matured. So it's a relationship skill that has to be part and parcel of the school, and it must never be taken out. It must be the way the school relates. So instead of having classrooms set up with rows and desks and 5-year-olds together and 7-year-olds, they're set up as communities with maybe 2 to 7-year-olds together with a team of teachers that teaches them for 4 or 5 years. That then integrates, like maybe let's say from 5 to 10, integrates again, where there's some overlap. And that way kids can move in and out while they're learning their cognition, but it's all going to be this relationship thing built upon this idea that you're always making a choice. And we call it, when somebody really gets into their petty me, we immediately say, oh, that's petty me. So I now said it's a choice. You just made a choice that's unacceptable. And it's not going to be allowed to stand. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to get back to your bright me? Your happy me, your great me? What is wrong with your thinking at the moment? So
you're getting, if I understand, you're wanting the students to have kind of like a bit of a self-awareness, kind of looking, kind of self-knowledge, kind of trying to get kind of look at themselves. But it seems like you're setting it up as kind of like a good and bad. It's like people are seeing it in kind of a judgmental terms of, this is the good side of me, this is the bad side of me, and I have to choose between the two. And it's
don't we?
Don't we? And it seems it seems like that's kind of like based on judgment, that there's kind of like a sense of judgment. There's other ways of looking and saying, what is behind these different feelings that are going on? It's like,
it's not judgment, it's discernment.
Discernment?
It's discernment. Judgment means I'm going to put it on you. Okay? I'm saying you're great, but you know darn well you are making behavior choices 24/7. And you know that those behavior choices are either going to do good to another, help, touch, create happiness, or you're going to try to do some kind of harm. You know that. Intuitively, you get that. And you struggle with that. All of humanity does. So why not just be honest about it and just put it out there on the table? Instead of as judgment, we put it as a behavior choice, and we have to discern. If we want an empathic oneness, unity of oneness, then we're going to have to really be wanting to win. And win in terms of us all benefiting, which would be a happy, great outcome, right?
So if we started with the question of how do we build a culture of empathy, and so if you kind of went through kind of the bullet points of what we've talked about, what would those bullet points be? It's like one, what it seemed to be, just as kind of in a synopsis, is one is systems thinking, think in terms of the system,
and the holism,
and a holism. 2 was have the vision of where you want to go. And then I guess we're talking about some processes of getting from, where we are to where we want to go.
You can't ever take holism out. You can never take holism out of the picture.
But okay? What would those bullet points be? What else?
One of them would be you can never take holism out of the picture. Every time you think about something, you always have to be looking at the whole. And you also need to think in terms of a dichotomy, because humanity is really living with a constant dichotomy of behavior choice. Do I want my behavior to be win-win or win-lose? Do I want my behavior to be the great expression of me in which I am respecting and being empathic and reaching out and accepting? Or do I want to be petty and me and a tyrant and think of myself to the exclusion of you, me first? That's just an honest human thing. And if we don't address that, we will never have peace on earth, because we will not be addressing the core issue that has kept humanity split for all these years. We have to be real about that. If we want an empathic world, we need to have a way to deal with those 2 choices that never leave the human spirit. Animals don't have to sit there and have that thought, but humans do.
Okay.
So we have to have that as the core, and that has to be taught and matured
Well,
all the way
thing,
through.
well, here the thing with the animals is, I mean, there's scientists like Franz de Waal who has shown the kind of the aspect of empathy is since it's kind of like a biological evolutionary kind of a process, that pieces of empathy, you know, parts of empathic process are actually throughout the animal, you know, within animals, especially in mammals. So there's been like studies that actually show that rats have some, you know, capacity for, you know, empathy, and that empathic connection is actually within animals that have self-awareness. You know, for example, especially dolphins, elephants, you know, chimpanzees, bonobos, and like that. So there is. I know you said that a couple of times about animals, seeing us as very distinct from animals, but there does seem to be, you know, that quality of empathy being, you know, parts of the empathic process are within animals as well. So
I would call that the universal spirit that breathes our heart, beats our breath, causes life to actually exist. And its natural state is beautiful, loving, kind. Okay. Now, humans have a much more obligation and responsibility because they can think and use these skills in a very self-aware kind of way. So they really need to have clarity and honesty within themselves, emotional honesty, to say, I'm always choosing between two basic consequences. One that's going to go forward to cause more rapport and empathy and oneness, or I'm going for separation and specialness, and I'm going to win at any cost.
So just to kind of summarize, then, you're seeing to see the systems approach, kind of like the Google Earth approach, right? To see the whole picture, and then within that picture, that we need to look at kind of what the consequences of our actions are. Do our actions promote connection between people, or do they promote kind of separateness?
Exactly.
Is basically, we need to, and you're saying, you know, we need to promote the connection part.
And we need to promote not only the connection part. We need to actually recognize that we are innately good. Our personhood is valuable. We're worthy just as we are. And we need to look at our behavior choices fall into one or two categories and get clarity about that. And I'd call that discernment. We have to discern and be honest. There's your friend's integrity ideas. Okay? And part of my figuring that out is being able to have some empathy. If I can't really sense consequences or impact I'm having upon another, I'm isolating, aren't I? So how do I start reaching and having a union or putting the puzzle pieces together if I don't have these variety of skills all coming together and converging to allow me to have this very high order of being able to create harmonic resonance with other people and animals and the earth and Mother Nature. When you were saying the Google Earth, a picture appeared in my eyes. If we look at the big whole picture, like the big Google Earth picture, and we look down, you'll see a neural net, all these points. We see that we have to include all of them. Any piece we miss is like a black hole that can break the whole system. That's why systems approach is very important. That's why holism is very important. We always need to be asking ourselves, are we missing anything and not having a holism here? The biggest problem we have with education right now is, well, it's quite a few things. One, it's not wanting to let go of accepting a new paradigm is here. It's still trying to save what it is. It's not willing to like just open up and be different. That's okay. This always happens as things come to their cycle end. We remorse, we lament, we hang on. We don't want to let go. So rather than fighting, I call it an education, an evolution by revolution. The idea is what we want to do is we don't want to fight. We don't want to try to force people who aren't ready to make the change. We want to go parallel and start creating a systems approach for those who are ready. There's nothing like a model that's cogent and working and beautiful that people can look at and say, I didn't think that was possible. Wow. can I do that too?
Yeah.
And then you help them replicate
So
it.
instead of being in the system then and saying, kind of working at trying to change the system, because the systems tend to try to protect their structure, it's been my experience, is to really model. If we want a culture of empathy, we're going to have to model what that culture looks like so that people can see it and then say, oh, well, that looks pretty good. So, but anyway, we've gone for a little over 45 minutes.
Wow.
So I kind of had the sense that we could go for hours.
Yeah,
here.
we could easily. There's a lot to talk about.
So,
and a great conversation.
So we can.
Very exciting.
Yeah. So I appreciate you taking the time to kind of share your thoughts and your program, which I'll put that up on the website here. It's Antakarna. What is that? Co-creation. Antakarana. Co-creation.
Antakarana.
Co-creation learning project, and that's at akarna.com. And that's.
Do you know what the word means?
No.
Antakarana? It's actually like a web grid between our source and us here on Earth as a unity of oneness, mirroring and emulating our original intention. And then co-creation, of course, is going to what we're talking about with empathy and everything else. Let's all create it together. Instead of saying, let's just cooperate, let's actually realize we got creative skills and do it together. Antakarana co-creation, learning. And we realize that it's all going to be about learning. Nobody's going to know everything. We're all going to learn from each other. And project, meaning we're actually going to have maybe different parallel systems that will all be intercommunicating with each other, helping each other to emulate to the world this great model, a new way of being. And also means by providing models, we're also going to project like an arrow onto a bullseye of where we want to go.
Okay, well, with that, I'll stop the recording.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.